Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition and of Gaia Thrift where I am right now. And here in Danville, we're having a bit of a rainy day. Beautiful, but rainy. And we've had people coming into the store looking for Halloween items, looking for Halloween costumes and decoration, which as it happens, is here to be found. And so it's been a lovely morning. I hope you are having a lovely morning. And today is October 31st, which at sundown will become Samhain, or in the Southern Hemisphere, Beltane. And many people are already celebrating the holiday, which does not need to be only confined to its exact hours, and in fact, in ancient times, was a multi-day celebration. So happy Samhain to everyone, and happy Beltane if you're in the Southern Hemisphere. And I hope that you're enjoying your Sabbat. And Samhain and Beltane are considered the gateways of the year. Samhain is the feast of life and the gateway to summer and the world of physical manifestation. And Samhain is the feast of the ancestors and the gateway to winter and the season of introspection and magic. And at this time, we honor our ancestors. Really, as a Corellian at all festivals, we honor our ancestors, but especially this one. There is an ancient belief that the veil between the worlds is thinnest at these two festivals, Samhain and Beltane. Now, I will tell you as a medium, I don't particularly notice that, but I know many people do. And I would say that, the spirits are always there. They can always speak to you. And when you do this regularly, that you don't really notice any particular thinning of the veil because it's always thin, but that's because you've learned how to communicate through it. Many people feel this is the time when that veil is especially thin, and for people who do not necessarily do mediumistic work, this is a particularly good time to honor the ancestors. It is believed that they are particularly accessible at the gates of the year, and that this is a particularly magical time. And hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you, Michael. This is where all the costumes and things come from. Samhain and Beltane are very ancient festivals. They come out of the ancient Celtic year, and they have been adapted in various ways over the centuries. In the Roman Catholic year, they were adapted as, Samhain in particular was adapted as All Souls Day. In Protestant England, it's become Guy Fawkes Night. And yet, if you look at these holidays, they carry on the same basic features, or many of the same basic features, as the ancestral Samhain. Particularly All Souls Day, which is about honoring the ancestors. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. I know Renee has been a little under the weather. I hope you're feeling better. It's, again, a rainy day here in Danville. You may be able to hear the rain. And unfortunately, it's probably going to be rainy for the trick-or-treaters this evening. Tomorrow is going to be Harry Potter Fest here in Danville, which is an observance of many years duration at this point. And hello to Charmed Healer in the chat room. It's good to see you. And the Harry Potter Fest, leaving aside any issues about the author, is widely celebrated here, where people love to get in their costumes and have a second day for the Halloween celebrations, basically, continuing to focus on magic and related ideas. Last year, I noticed there were several inflatable dragons in downtown Danville. I'm very curious to see what we have tomorrow. The idea of what we would call trick-or-treating goes back many centuries. Nobody, I don't think, can really say how many, but it is recorded from medieval times when it was more of a practice for adults. And it was similar to things you see at some other holidays, such as wassailing at the Yule holiday. It was a very similar thing, going from house to house, singing and in various forms of disguise, and receiving food or drink in return. And it was called souling at the time. And this is a very ancient custom. So when we dress up in costumes today, it's not something new. Some people think it goes all the way back to the ancient celebrations of Samhain. Unfortunately, these are not so well recorded that we can really say one way or the other. It might. The thing that we do know about those ancient celebrations is that they heavily involved fire. And this was a festival celebrated with bonfires. And that we still see, for example, in the Guy Fawkes Night, in some older customs of Halloween. You'll notice I'm wearing my orange and black, which is frequently said to be the colors for the holiday. And the reason, of course, is black for night, orange for fire, because this was a holiday heavily associated with fire. And for us today, for Wiccans, for pagans, for Corellians today, it's primarily about honoring the ancestors. And again, many people feel that they're more accessible at this time. I don't find that in my personal practice. I find them always accessible. But I do feel that it's appropriate to have a particular time to honor them. And so at this time of year, like everyone else, I honor my ancestors. I try to talk to them always, but especially at this time of year. I had gone out to Greenwood Cemetery the other day to pay my respects at the family tombs. And traditionally, this was a time when people would go to the local graveyard and have a feast with the spirits of their ancestors. I believe this is still done in many Hispanic countries. It had been a pretty universal custom throughout Europe at one time. And the other variation on that is to have the feast in your home, but set places for the ancestors. And this is a very important custom to continue. Now, one of the things that is often brought to me as a question is, how do we reconcile the idea of reincarnation and the idea of ancestors? And hello to Jade in the chat room. It's good to see you, Jade. And to me, this is not a particularly difficult thing, partly because it's been a feature of my whole life, because I was raised with ancestor veneration, but also a belief in reincarnation. And the way that I understand it is that when we talk about our soul, it's not just a larger version of our conscious mind. It's more complicated than this expression. And it is possible for a number of aspects that our soul has been to coexist simultaneously within the overall soul. So the different lives that have been led still exist at some portion always within the soul, depending on the extent to which they're needed. But part of this is also connected to the idea of simultaneity. The idea that there's only really now, that past and future are illusions. And if we're looking at time this way, as a feature of this world, but not of the spiritual world, then all of those reincarnations are simultaneous anyway. And it follows that the nature of the soul must permit for this. And that, to me, resolves any question of how we can both have our ancestor veneration and our reincarnation. It all continues to exist. Now, there's also the idea, a little bit more linearly thinking, um, that you have a space between lives, and this is also a way of looking at it. But after many years of working with reincarnational studies and working with people in their past lives, I have the feeling that the past life never really ceases to exist, though it may cease to be a particularly active aspect of the soul, but it can always be called upon, it can always be spoken to, in the same way that if you are a writer, every character that you've ever written about is still there in your head, even if you haven't thought about them for years. And you can still access them if you wish to. Yesterday, my guest was Laura Enright, the author of The Court of the Five Tribes. And we were talking about how when you're a writer, characters have a life of their own. You may have an idea for what you see them doing, but sometimes the story will just take itself in other directions. And I've certainly noticed this when writing, and I'm sure that anyone who has done creative writing has noticed it also. You may have an idea, but that character has a life of its own in a manner of speaking. And I think that when we look at this aspect of the things that we create, as writers, as artists for that matter, the fact that even after we've finished them or finished with them, they're still within us, I think the same is true for the soul. Everything has ever been remains. It is agglutinative. It doesn't move from one thing to another, but one thing and another. This does, of course, require seeing the soul as a larger version of your true self. And this brings us back to that teaching about the seven planes of existence. And when we talk, for example, about the astral plane and our astral selves, anyone who has worked with energetic work, astral projection, etc., knows that there's more going on in their astral self than there is in their conscious self. Or the next plane up is the solar self, the plane of the soul. There's more going on there. And so it's not as simple as some people want to envision it. And when we work with our higher selves, we often find ourselves working with a much broader field of experience than anything we have had in this one lifetime, because all of it is still there. And this is one of the things that I think is very important to our teachings. The idea that we can still access everything we've ever been. Some would say everything we're going to be. We just have to get ourselves to the level that that veil is thin enough to do so. And when we practice psychism, when we work with it, we progressively thin our personal veil. And as I said when I started this, I do not particularly notice today any particular thinning of the veil at Soen, because for me it's always thin, because I've spent so much time working with the spirits, so much time doing mediumistic work, that while I would say it's still there, it's not thick at all. But I would have to say that when I was younger, yes, I did notice it more. And one of the things that I believe is that part of our purpose in this life is to progressively embody more and more of our spiritual selves, our higher selves, which means progressively thinning that veil for everyone, in every aspect. And I think part of what we're seeing with the changes in technology is a bit of a physicalization of this process. I've spoken about that before, how in many ways we're physicalizing some of what have previously been experiences that we only had on the astral level. And I think we're going to see more of that, and I think that's going to include our ability to communicate with the ancestors. Um, Hello, welcome. And I think that we'll only see more of this as we go forward. And I personally am looking forward to that. And I hope that you are also. And tomorrow, hello. I'm sorry I don't have that much today. Oh, okay. But hopefully in the future. Okay. So I am here alone today. So I also am dealing with customers. If I can help you with anything else, just let me know. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about our upcoming super auction, our upcoming Corellian super auction, which will have items of special interest to our Corellian audience, as well as to everyone. And that will be on November 10th. And I hope you'll join us for that. And we're planning to make a major event of it. But I'll be talking about that tomorrow. And today, basically just wanted to talk a bit about the Samhain holiday, and hope that you're having a wonderful one. And with that, let us take a moment to hear from our sponsors. Because we love our sponsors.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, which, again, I'll be talking about tomorrow. So I hope that you're having a wonderful Samhain, or Beltane, depending on where you are. And, I've spoken before about how when I do online ritual, and before that, when I was doing radio ritual, I have developed the habit of honoring both Sabbats at once, because I recognized we had an international audience, and that some of the people who were watching would be in the Northern Hemisphere, some in the Southern Hemisphere. And I also have found that really gave me an increased understanding of our holidays, because each combination of Sabbat ultimately seems to address the same basic issues, but in opposite ways. With Beltane and Samhain, it is life and death, literally the two gates of being and the two gates of the year. We come into life, we go out of life. We come into the summer and the growing months, and we leave this to go into winter and the inward turning months. And I find that they reflect a great deal on each other when you consider them together. And I'm very pleased to see more of our pagan leadership acknowledging the international character of the movement, and that there are people celebrating um, opposite sabbats at once in different parts of the world. Of course, this is um, a practice that has variations. Not everyone in the Southern Hemisphere necessarily reverses their calendar, um, but the majority do. There are some who will use a Northern Hemisphere calendar, but Beltane is the start of summer, which in the Southern Hemisphere is happening now. And so for most people in the Southern Hemisphere, they observe that difference in the sabbats. And I think that recognizing that, again, gives us a broader view of the Sabbat itself, but it also speaks to us about the resolution of opposites, which to me is one of the great secrets of the universe. Very often, I find dealing with myself and other people that most commonly a person's greatest strength and their greatest weakness are going to turn out to be the same thing. The resolution of opposites, perhaps because I'm a Gemini, has been one of the major themes of my life. And I highly recommend taking time to consider how opposite things reflect on one another. This also, and it might be a bit of a stretch, but it kind of speaks to that practice of isopsiphos, which I write about in Rev Don's book of numerology, and also in the second degree materials, which is where you compare words based on their numerological meaning. This is a Greek system of numerology where you do not take the number down to a single digit, but rather you take the full number of the word and you compare it to other words with that same full number, in the premise that they reflect one another in some way. And that can be very insightful. And I think that it's a practice that is good throughout life. I'm a great believer, obviously, in the idea of as above, so below, that everything in the created world that we live in reflects spirit to us, if we look at it. And I think Samhain is a particularly good time to reflect on that. I see we're coming toward the end of our half hour. I think the last thing I'm going to comment upon is the pronunciation of the word Samhain. And this is, of course, a Gallic pronunciation, a Gallic word. You find it in Scottish Gaelic, you find it in Irish Gaelic, and you can see it reflected as far back as the colony calendar in Roman imperial times. Anyone who's familiar with the Celtic languages knows that the way they're spelled is not an immediate indication of how they're pronounced from an English-speaking point of view. So the word Samhain is spelled Samhain. Because of that, many people who don't understand the pronunciation pronounce it as Samhain, in much the same way that they pronounce the spring holiday as Beltane, which is just as far off from the original pronunciation as Samhain is from Samhain. The actual pronunciation of Beltane being Baltana, or various close variations on that. It is worth noting that within the Celtic languages, there are several different pronunciations of all of these words. And I was raised to pronounce the holiday as Samhain. The Scottish pronunciation, which I'm assuming that came from, is closer to Samhain. The Irish is Samhain, or I beg your pardon, Samhain. And there are other variations as well, even within Scottish and Irish, but also in other parts of the Celtic world. And this is important to remember when we're talking about pronunciation. Every year at this time, I hear people get terribly upset that some people will say Samhain. And I think this is counterproductive. I think it's perfectly appropriate to say, well, it's actually pronounced Samhain, or Samhain, or however you pronounce it. I recently heard someone pronounce it as Samhain, and I'm not entirely sure where that came from. But although they said they had a Geordie accent, which I don't think is particularly Celtic, but that's beside the point. But the thing is, there are many pronunciations, and that's not what we should be worried about. The question is, do you understand what you're saying? And again, Samhain, while perhaps not the ideal way to pronounce the term, is no farther off from how many people pronounce the names of the Grand Sabbats, because most of them have no idea how to pronounce Gaelic. Lunasa is another one that's frequently mispronounced. And big deal. It really is not terribly relevant to anything. So I would say pronounce it the way that you can, but celebrate it well, and you'll be in good stead. But that's usually my point of view on the subject of pronunciation. For me, and for many people, this is my favorite holiday, both in its aspect of Samhain and also in its aspect of Halloween, which I, for one, do see as very tightly connected, although Halloween is also very closely connected to All Souls Day, which in turn is also closely connected to Samhain. And in my mind, rather than points of division, these could be points of unity if we were that kind of people. But I find the many different customs all quite desirable and all quite beautiful. And I hope that you find this a good occasion to honor your ancestors. And, if you have, well, that's one last good point to make. Though I'll grant you it is perhaps more of a Corellian point of view than you might find in some other traditions. When you're dealing with your ancestors, if they are in fact fully seated ancestors, you're dealing with the higher self of the being. And problems that they manifested in life are not going to be manifest in that relationship. If they have fully crossed into the court of the ancestors. If they have not fully crossed, they may still have all of the imperfections they had in this life. I noticed this especially at the time of my father's death. My father was a man with many difficulties, but as a spirit, these were immediately obvious in not being there. The entire feeling was different, but that's because he had crossed over, and that's what happened. Hello, welcome. If I can help you with anything, just let me know. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to be with us at this sacred time of year, and to help us as we celebrate our connection to those who have led the way, our beloved ancestors. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we know you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always. I'll see you again tomorrow.